Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello and welcome or welcome back to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and on this show, I am your fellow traveler and guide in this journey of doing business with radical generosity and energetic sovereignty. And today on the podcast, I am joined by an art psychotherapist. So last week, we were joined by someone who is an artist and a psychotherapist. That was Edgar Fabian Frias. And this week, we are joined by someone who is an art therapist and a psychotherapist. So we are just in our therapy art era here on Off the Grid. And I'm so happy that you've tuned in. Before I tell you more about today's guest, I just want to remind you that this podcast is paired with an amazing free resource called the Leaving Social Media Toolkit. Inside that toolkit, you will find the tools that I used to leave social media and start my successful business without it. And that includes a 5-step plan for leaving any social platform, a list of 100 ways to share your work and life without social media, and a creative marketing ideas database to help you make a plan for how you will continue to grow your audience, build your business, and make more money without relying on social media to bring new people into your ecosystem. Those 3 tools pair with the first 5 or so episodes of the podcast. So if you are brand new around here, I really do want to encourage you to grab the toolkit and head back to the very beginning of the pod feed and just get back to basics with me. We can only start where we're starting, right? And the starting place for this show is episodes 1 through 4, for sure. So if you haven't done it yet, you can head to offthegrid.fun/toolkit or the link in the show notes to get the free toolkit today. And if you've already done that, thanks so much for tuning in. You can always get it again anytime you need it, or it is actually linked at the very bottom of every Off the Grid email I send. So just pop into your inbox, revisit it anytime, and continue to explore these ideas with me in conversation here every Wednesday. So I've already told you a little bit about today's guest, but let me give you her bio before we dive into this conversation. Amelia Knott is a registered psychotherapist and art therapist, specializing in the mental health impacts of hustle culture and social media. She's also an artist, content creator, and author living and working online from the Slocan Valley of British Columbia. Last year, she published an amazing book called The Art of Thriving Online: Creative Exercises to Help You Stay Grounded and Feel Joy in the World of Social Media. I loved her book. Her publisher actually even sponsored a few weeks of the show. And today I'm really excited to be connecting with Amelia around these topics of digital wellness and ethical marketing, and also, frankly, to reconnect. Like, I straight up asked her, do you think we can still thrive online in 2025? We get very real and very honest, and I was really grateful that she was willing to go there with me in this conversation. So if you are asking yourself if it's possible to thrive online this year, if you are wanting resources for connecting with your feelings about social media and online business in this era, and also if you're thinking about how to market in ways that are more trauma-informed and full of care, and honestly just like kind to your audience and your clients and your customers, you're going to love this episode. So let's go ahead and dive on in to my conversation with Amelia Knott. Hi, Amelia. Welcome to Off the Grid.
Hi, Amelia. Really happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you. I rarely meet other Amelias of our generation. I meet lots of little kids named Amelia, not so many millennials named Amelia. So what a treat. 2 Amelias today. Double the fun. It is also double the fun because while you have not been on the podcast before, I have promoted your book on this show before, The Art of Thriving Online, a workbook full of creative exercises to help you stay grounded and feel joy in the world of social media. This was one of my favorites of last year, even though I'm not on social media. And I was so thrilled when Sounds True reached out about promoting it. And I'm even more thrilled to have you actually here today to talk all about this and more. So thank you so much for creating this book for all of us and for taking the time to be here.
Oh my gosh, that makes me fangirl so hard. I've been a longtime listener, and the conversations you're having specifically about like this tension we feel about being online or choosing to be offline has been, I mean, it's been instrumental. It's been such a huge part of my process and research over the past couple of years. So extra excited to be in conversation.
Yes, I love it. And your book is blurbed by someone else who was on the podcast this season, Maria Bowler. And as I was going back through it, I was like, we're all just having the same conversation with each other in all of our books and on our podcasts. And what a treat to be thinking and speaking together. So I want our conversation today to kind of have two sides, two halves, maybe. I'm thinking I would love to dive into a lot of things you talk about in the book around digital wellness and social media and how to thrive online, as you put it in your book title, even in the midst of the very quickly shifting, I think, sentiments and landscape of social media in 2025. So I'm going to talk about that first. And then I want to have a conversation about ethical marketing, because as a psychotherapist and an art therapist, I know that you have a lot to say about ethical marketing for therapists online. And I think even all the non-therapists among us, like myself, have a lot to learn from how you talk about this. So that's what's on the menu today, my friends, dear listeners. We're going to have these two halves of the conversation. Make sure you stick around for that second half. It's going to be amazing. But Amelia, I was wondering if you could take us in with like a hugely general question, but I think you're equipped to answer it, which is, what is digital wellness and what does that look like on social media?
I don't know if you have the same reaction to hearing the word wellness, but it kind of feels like heavy on my shoulders, or just like I get kind of tense. And I think it's really important when we dive into conversations about wellness to get really granular and specific about what we mean. Because in the context of technology and our digital lives, I think wellness has become this like ubiquitous buzzword that kind of is devoid of meaning at this point, right? Like when I think about how we might experience wellness content on TikTok or Instagram, it's visual, right? Those are places where we experience content in the form of posts and videos. And I think what that means is our conception of wellness, or at least the conversations about wellness we can have online, oftentimes are limited to what can be like shown or performed or symbolized. Like it's not an accident that if I go and look up hashtag wellness, I'm pretty sure what I would find is green smoothies and probably thin white bodies doing yoga, right?
And supplements. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So wellness as a concept is so meaningful, but also meaningless unless we get specific about what we're talking about for ourselves. So I think something that's been really important just in my own journey with social media and my own work as a mental health practitioner is getting specific about the terms. So I think for me, the first piece is that wellness is relational, right? I don't think that healing or health or any of these concepts that fit into this are things that we can do alone, right? Wellness is not, as social media might have us believe, this solitary journey of personal ascension, right? It's something we do together. It's something that happens when we're in relationship with other people, right? That's, I think, the bedrock of how therapy works as well. And then beyond that, I think it's easy to think about wellness just in terms of the self. So I think wellness also has to be thought of in terms of liberation, right? It's not just about, again, who we are alone, our personal habits, our own sense of self-discipline. It is about how we're in community, right? Who do our wellness practices leave behind? How do definitions of health support everybody? And how do they leave some people out? So I think we're talking about relationship, we're talking about the collective. And then because I'm an art psychotherapist, I really I really believe that creativity is an essential ingredient here. And I mean, in my own life, there's a reason that I've chosen this specific part of the world of mental health. I think having tools to express ourselves beyond the realm of language, right, is so life affirming, is such an important way to connect to like our deep humanness. And then beyond that, I think it's a creative act to imagine a different future for ourselves, for our country, for our communities, right? So for me, digital wellness is hard to define because it's different for every single person. And again, I think when we talk about wellness, it's really impossible to put it into one definition because we're all going to experience well-being in totally different ways. A more useful question, I think, that I ask myself is, what does it feel like when I'm well? And as much as I might have expertise in different conversations about mental health, I can't tell another person how they feel when they're well. So what I think is much more useful is being able to invite ourselves into conversations with ourselves to get a little bit more fluency or familiarity with how we feel when we're in a state of wellness and getting an idea of what that means on an individual level.
I really love this emphasis you're placing on wellness as something not just that exists within us, but between us. That feels really important in what you're saying. And also the way that any aspect of wellness or well-being is essentially a conversation we have to have with ourselves. We have to understand how we're feeling. And what I was thinking about as you were sharing that latter part around like wellness and knowing how you're feeling and how you feel when you feel well, and then social media, is that I feel like while on this podcast, I talk obviously about leaving social media and critiquing social media. Like, I remember when I was on it, there were plenty of ways that I could feel well there. There were plenty of aspects of my social media experience that felt good. It was just eventually the additive way that so much of it felt bad meant that I couldn't access the feeling good as much, or that the sort of like balance of those two things, the bad was just outweighing the good on these little like inner scales I was weighing things on in my mind. So I'm curious, like, when you think about social media, like, how do you help people start to notice what they're feeling on social media, or even you personally? Like, how do you tap into your digital wellness, like on these apps specifically? What are those practices for checking in with your feelings and then maybe making decisions or trying to feel better from there?
Well, I think you kind of named it already. I think it's acknowledging that for most of us, it's going to be holding a paradox. It's not going to be all bad, or else none of us would ever use those platforms. And it's not going to be all good because persuasive technology is designed, like literally, to addict us and manipulate our psychological vulnerability. So we're left in this really difficult position of reckoning with these tools that in some ways are really, really meaningful, right? They can be genuine sources of inspiration and community and expression. And I mean, many of our lives, our businesses, and our work is intertwined with technology. And I mean, I think anybody who's listening to this podcast will also have the experience of like, oh, and there's something that's just not working. So I think, first of all, holding that it's always going to be kind of a tangle of feelings, right? And that we don't need to shame ourselves for the parts that don't feel good. I think another important part of this conversation is that a lot of the rhetoric around being well online has to do with self-discipline, right? And all the things or all the ways that we're getting it wrong being online, the fact that we can't keep our screen time down, the fact that we're following the wrong accounts, or that there's something wrong in the way we've developed digital habits. And the result is that we're having a bad experience, as opposed to kind of looking upstream at the fact that these are systemic issues, right? So I think another part of this, or kind of a context piece that is important for all of us to hold as we're thinking about our relationships with technology, is that a lot of the solutions that are being proposed to us are individual solutions for systemic problems. So that doesn't quite answer your question. I think that is just, those are the context pieces I'd like to hold in conversations about digital wellness. But when it comes to actually like auditing our experience or starting to get a sense of the landscape that we're living in, having more of an attitude of neutrality can be be a really wonderful starting place. Because so many of us, I think, are coming into conversations with ourselves about our screen time or our tech use with this sense of shame, with this sense that if I could just get it right, or if I could just control myself or be consistent in my use of it, then it wouldn't be so painful. So something I like to suggest is doing kind of an attention audit, right? Looking at what you're actually being served in your algorithm and seeing if maybe that's a little bit different from what you expect. I mean, this is something that happens in the first chapter of the book that covers the topic of attention. So first of all, doing some reflecting about what is it that I think I see in my algorithm, right? If I opened up Instagram or Facebook or whatever platform I'm using, what do I expect to see there? And then actually comparing that with what are the first 10 posts, right? What is the algorithm actually feeding me? What are my reactions to that, right? Not using that information to judge or say something's wrong, but just to really get, a sense of the landscape that you're living in. And then what I think can also be really useful in addition to that is then comparing that with some data from like your physical life. I'm hesitant to say real life because I don't want to say that the time we spend online isn't real, but I mean, that's a whole other conversation. So I think doing that kind of attention audit of like what's actually happening on my screen versus like what is actually happening and what kinds of sensations am I gravitating toward in my physical experience of life. So there's another activity in there in that first chapter that I called a sensory scavenger hunt, where you literally go around your home and find like, what are the smells I gravitate toward? What are like the textures and the colors? Like, what is it in my physical experience of the world that makes me feel like myself, makes me feel well? And then the question that we might ask ourselves is, okay, what is the difference between what I gravitate toward in my physical, tangible life versus what I'm spending my time immersed in online? And I think from kind of comparing those two data sets, like taking that attitude of a neutral researcher, then we can begin to start to make decisions or assess what's working, what's not working, right? You might also find that there's a lot of good in what you're seeing and how you're spending your time. So letting that be true and exist as well, I think is important.
I really appreciate what you're saying because I'm here all day long to like critique the systemic issues, but I'm not taking the force of those critiques to individual people. Like each of us gets to have our own relationship with these apps. And really the interjection I want to make is that like anyone who believes they have to be on social media, I want to be here to be like, no, you don't have to be. Like this is a myth that the social media companies have told us, like there are other pathways. But if you want to be, for all these reasons we're already bringing up and in, like that's a different piece of the puzzle. And like, I think that all of our experiences of social media are different and interesting and welcome here. And of course, I'm centering those of us who choose not to be on it or to be on it less. But like, that's not because I'm anti anybody listening, opening up TikTok or Instagram today. Like, do what you want. I don't care.
And not demonizing the want, right? I think this is often a trap that we find ourselves in. I mean, in any conversation about wellness, that there's one definition, one right way to experience ourselves or experience health. And that if there's something in technology or any habit that actually feels good or actually lets us be a part of ourselves, then we have to pretend it doesn't exist. Like, I loved being on TikTok. I say that as if it's in the past tense because I feel like that shifted for me recently. But oh my gosh, like some of the most meaningful relationships of my life have come from social media, right? I don't take that lightly. I also, I mean, just as you're saying, if I was a trans teenager in a state that was trying to criminalize my existence, then perhaps my most safe, meaningful sources of community and safety would be message boards and social media platforms, right? There's a lot of reasons why we might choose to stay. Some of those might be needs, some of those might be wants. So yeah, I'm on the same team as you when it comes to honoring the fact that this is a really, again, tangly conversation and just holding that we'll probably never be solved around it, right? We'll probably never get to a place where we feel like, okay, I figured it out. leaving was the answer, or staying but logging off at 9 p.m. was the answer. One, because we are ourselves beings that will be constantly evolving for the rest of our lives. And also because technology is evolving at a breakneck pace. Like it's funny to even look back at the book now because so many of the references I made just a year ago are already totally outdated, right?
Writing about social media definitely does that to us. When I listen back to the early episodes of the podcast, like the first ones where I talk about leaving, a lot of the stuff I say like is or isn't possible now is or isn't possible. Like when I left Instagram, you couldn't turn comments off on posts. That wasn't a thing. So so many just like those tiny little things, right? The features change and then the possibilities change and the expectations change and all of that along with it. I want your take on something because you wrote this book, The Art of Thriving Online. And I feel like in 2025, the general cultural sentiment has just shifted to be like, nobody can thrive on social media. We're all suffering here. And it's been fascinating, obviously, for me to hear this because I've been a little bit on that train for a while. And I'm so curious how you relate to that. Like, are you thinking about your book being like, ugh, I don't know if we can do this at all anymore? Or are you feeling like, even more double down on the practices? I would love just like your honest, open thoughts about it.
Yeah, I have moments of both. I think luckily the stance I take in the book is that thriving online is not about figuring out how to stay on social media and feel good about it. It's about how to develop practices using creativity so that we know how to check in with ourselves and reorient toward ourselves and know what the warning signs are for being burned out or feeling like we're stuck in fear or comparison or hustle culture, right? So perhaps my answer is that I don't think it's possible to thrive online when we're using social media in the way it was designed to be used. But I do think it's possible to keep lines of communication open with ourselves and remain flexible to shift and change as we evolve and as technology evolves. So there's kind of a no in that yes. My definition of thriving online is less about how we relate to social media and how we relate to ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I really love this and it makes so much sense to me because I read your book and felt like it applied to me too, right? And I'm not on social media and I wasn't when I read the book. So I love kind of how you have redefined thriving online, not as being successful on social media in social media's terms, right? But as actually building a toolkit with which you can check in on how you're doing kind of in any aspect of your life through these sorts of practices. And your focus is on our lives online. But, you can use a sensory check-in for any sort of reason that you might want. Like many of the practices in this book, I feel like you can apply to online or offline things.
Yeah, you've got that the book, I think, is kind of a Trojan horse for just like a philosophy of way of living and just talking about art therapy in general. I think, yeah, my greatest intention was that it wouldn't just specifically apply to a person who uses social media in one kind of way. And I mean, what I found for myself is that when like the book was conceived and I was really inside the tension of whether or not being online conflicted with being well, I was using social media a ton and feeling well there. And something's really shifted in the past, I guess, 5 years of being on this journey. So I feel like the practices and the philosophies that, I lean into just as a creative person, as an art therapist, are helpful when choosing to stay, when grappling with leaving, and I hope will be useful to me in phases where I choose to be much more offline.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's true of the book, at least as a reader of it. Okay, I have one more question about social media for you, which is I'm so curious, like, how are you using social media this year? How are you, quote unquote, thriving online? What does that mean to you in 2025? And what practices do you have in place? Or like, do you have a lot of boundaries? Do you spend a ton of time on there and you're loving it? Like, I would just love some reflections on your personal relationship to social media these days.
You know what? I feel kind of like that Simpsons meme of like backing into a hedge. Like I'm kind of just like stepping away from social media slowly right now.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest disappointment of writing the book is that I hoped it would fix me. Like, I hoped I'd come out the other side and be like, oh, great, I figured it out. And that didn't happen. I think my relationship with social media is kind of worse than ever. And that doesn't mean anything's wrong, right? Social media is also more powerful than ever. But I guess I'm kind of thinking about, this relationship I've had with technology in like 3 chapters. In the early pandemic, when I started using TikTok and when I was building my art psychotherapy business online, social media felt amazing. Like, I remember waking up and feeling just energized to create content. It felt really like a creative outlet to imagine a therapeutic art project and to film it and to edit it. Like, there was something in that felt really life-giving and energizing. And then I can't ignore the fact that that relationship and that era of using social media is what led to having a business that supports me, is what led to a literary agent, a book deal, right? I kind of built this life for myself using the free tools that social media affords me. And then I think a shift started to happen in the writing process. I realized pretty quickly that I didn't have enough, I guess, creative energy to go both into like the most demanding project of my life and then also to be creating thoughtful content for social media. And so I kind of made peace with that. I thought to myself, like, okay, I'm going to put content creation aside, at least in the way I've been doing it. While I write this book, I'm going to devote myself to this creative project, which, I mean, I think no surprise, I felt much more connected to like the writing and the gestating of the book. But I always had this thought in the back of my mind, like, okay, when the book is done, I'm going to find my way back. I'm going to be able to jump back on the bandwagon. The algorithm is going to treat me the same, and I'll find the same enthusiasm to promote it that I did in writing it or that I did in showing up on social media the way I did 2 years ago. And it just never happened. Like, I think it was about a year ago now that I finished writing, and my like content creation mojo never returned. And there's been a lot of shame around that, I think. I've been kind of describing the process of staying online like pulling teeth and kind of feeling like it's my fault or feeling guilty about the fact that I can't muster the same performing energy. So it's been an interesting year of like launching a book that I put like my entire heart and soul into on platforms that like don't love me back, frankly. Right? That's been a pretty difficult relationship to manage over the past 12 months.
Oh, I can only imagine. And as a human being whose book release eventually led to me leaving social media, I feel right there with you in a lot of just like the questioning and the confusion and the like what comes of these feelings and the just being with them. Like, I think that's important too. I'm curious how this plays into, I know you've shared this with your social media followings now, and actually when this episode releases, you will be on maternity leave. So I'm curious how that plays into your plans for your work and for social media this year as well.
I think it feels like the excuse, not that I've needed an excuse to reevaluate my relationship with social media, but I feel like there's an opportunity inside this pause that I'm planning on taking. I'm currently 7 months pregnant right now. And I remember like shortly after getting pregnant, having this thought of like, oh, I get to leave, which isn't a thought I ever had beforehand. I don't know why I wouldn't give myself that permission, but it was kind of like writing the book. Like, I have a good enough reason to step back. And now there's this really good reason, right? I don't want to parent with my attention fractured the way it has been. I have really strong feelings about not sharing my daughter's life on social media until she can consent to that or ever, right? That's a conversation that will unfold over years. So there's something about like this era of my life that's coming up that feels kind of like crop rotation. That's been the metaphor I've been using. So it's like I get to leave the fields of myself fallow for a year or a period of time and just like let it be instead of trying to recycle and trying to continually grow something on soil that's depleted and is like losing its nutrients. So I'm excited about this phase of my life to kind of let my work be, let my relationship with social media be, and then see what happens when I return, if I return. So I think practically what that means for me is taking the apps off my phone. It means setting up my social media profiles so that they're more like a landing page, pointing people in the direction of my website. And yeah, just not using it as a consumer and stepping away from being a person who engages in entrepreneurship that way. I'm really excited to have that pause to see who I am on the other side of parenthood and what parts of social media still feel useful, still feel meaningful, but I haven't met that version of myself yet. So I'm making no promises about what will happen 6 months from now, a year from now.
Hey there, lovely Off the Grid listener. We're taking a quick break from this episode because I want to make sure that you know that you can become an Off the Grid sponsor and share your work here on the podcast during a mid-roll ad like this or in a pre-roll ad that airs before every single episode on our feed. In past seasons of the show, I have shared some of my favorite affiliate partners. If you've heard the Flowdesk ad, you know what that's all about. But since season 3, I've also been partnering with listeners like you to showcase your work and the amazing, inspiring things that you're creating and sharing with the world. I know I don't have to tell you this, but Off the Grid listeners are smart, fun, values-centered business owners who create and share impactful things on and offline. We are writers, artists, designers, wellness practitioners, service providers, shop owners, and product makers who know a lot about our craft, but need more support making the business side of things thrive. If that sounds like the kind of crew that you want to get your work, your products, your services, your books, your free lead magnets in front of, I hope that you will head to the show notes and learn more about placing an ad on the podcast today. One of our very happy sponsors from last year wrote to me and said this: "Placing an ad on Off the Grid was hands down the best investment I made last year. My cost per lead ended up being around $6, which is 70% less than Meta's average, and nearly all of those leads are still highly engaged a year later. On top of that, many have become customers, bringing in over 13 times the return on my investment." If you would like to hear your work shared by me and featured in a spot like this, you can head to the show notes to learn more about our ad opportunities. And whether or not you decide to sponsor an episode, I am so grateful that you listen to the show, and I hope that you will check out some of our partners this season. They have amazing free and paid offerings for you, so please make sure you click through when you hear them. Okay, enough about our sponsorship opportunities. Let's go ahead and dive back in to this episode. Okay, so this feels like a good moment to transition into sort of the second half of the conversation I wanted to have today, which is where I would really just like to, quote unquote, pick your brain around your expertise around ethical marketing. So my first question is kind of general, but I know you have a framework for this that I love to learn about, which is, how do you approach ethical marketing online as a mental health practitioner and licensed therapist? Like how do you conceive of kind of the different aspects of ethical marketing?
Ooh. I mean, this is one of my favorite conversations to have because it's such a new conversation, right? I think this generation of therapists, for the most part, our professors and our supervisors didn't come into the world of practicing therapy with technology and social media as a part of that. So we're kind of figuring it out as we go. It's a really interesting thing to be situated in the wellness world, which, as we've talked about, is such a nebulous, open-ended, undefined thing, where regulated health professionals have a very different set of rules that we have to follow than perhaps we see in the way online business works, right? Like the common marketing advice is pretty antithetical to the way that therapists or other health professionals have to work. And I think not just in terms of therapists or doctors or any other kind of health professional, I think oftentimes the common practices in online marketing are pretty antithetical to the way most of us want to be in a relationship or want to interface with our customers or our clients. But it's so interesting to be kind of dropped into like the wellness world and the entrepreneurial industrial complex, having a very different set of guidelines to follow that is invisible to the average person just consuming content.
What are those common marketing practices or tactics that you see that are like antithetical to either like the ethos or the like straight up rules around being a therapist?
Yeah, so to back up and give a kind of wider view, being a therapist means I am a member of a governing body with different kinds of regulations and ethical standards and rules, basically, that I have to follow when it comes to marketing, when it comes to talking about my work. So things like soliciting client testimonials is a straight up violation, offering discounts for referrals, making unsubstantiated claims about the outcome of the work I do, right? That's something that a therapist can't do. So maybe even a phrase like art will heal your trauma, right? That's something that I think you could see online and it wouldn't raise a red flag for most people. That's a pretty common way that we see wellness services talked about. But like my governing body or my regulatory board would take huge issue with that because, like, as we know, healing is so personal. I can't promise the outcome of therapy for someone, right? I don't know what is going to necessarily work. I can't promise that before I've begun working with someone. I can't promise anything, actually. So there's a really interesting kind of set of other rules that have to be followed as a therapist. And I think at first I was kind of grappling with the fact that, like, oh my gosh, like I'm following this set of rules, but social media feels like it operates on a totally different map. But I found it really relieving, actually. I think something that is really stressful about being an online business owner is that no one's telling you exactly what's right and exactly what's wrong. There's so much to figure out. And there's so many different definitions of ethical marketing that we see online as well, that having like a really defined set of practices and rules felt kind of reassuring to me. Like I knew kind of the boundaries of like, yeah, this is how I can talk about client work. This is how I cannot talk about client work. And then extending that into also just like the therapeutic considerations. There's the black and white rules to follow. But then there's also this question that I'm always asking of how will this piece of content or this disclosure about myself impact the people I work with or impact the people I might work with in the future?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many interesting things that you're bringing up here. But that last piece is really sticking with me because I think a lot about disclosure from therapists because I've worked with definitely more than one in my life. And some of them I worked with for a long time and knew absolutely nothing about their lives. And then others I would meet for like twice and I'd be like, I know way too much about your life. This doesn't feel like a therapy situation. How do you think about that specifically, like disclosing or sharing? I know this came up a little bit also in my conversation with Lisa Oliveira this season around just like sharing political beliefs or personal orientations in general, like on your social media platforms and how that relates to your work as a therapist. I'm just curious how you think through that.
Yeah, it's an interesting part of the conversation because I feel strongly that personal disclosure is in line with working from a feminist framework, right? If we intend on disrupting power hierarchies in therapeutic relationships, then oftentimes there's a place where the skillful sharing of personal details can be in service of that relationship, right? And the same, I think, goes for revealing or disclosing our political leanings, right? That can be something that helps to build trust and allyship and safety in a therapeutic relationship. But the question, and there's no right answer to this, is where's the line, right? Where's the line between me sharing to get a need met for myself, whether that's sharing online because there's clout involved or because there's something in that sharing that, yeah, gives me leverage. And where does that sharing also create or instead create a sense of universality or a point of connection or a piece of psychoeducation that might be useful for someone or reduces stigma? There's no way to know exactly how any share is going to land for people. Like I've definitely had the experience of clients coming to me and saying, I saw this thing you posted online and I had this reaction, which is, I think, a new consideration for therapists, right? That's something that we need to talk about. The fact that there's this other presence in the therapy room, right? If someone has found you online and developed a parasocial relationship with you first, that's going to be something that also impacts the relationship you have.
Oh, that's so interesting. And I mean, obviously, there are parallels in my own non-therapeutic work because people regularly show up to work with me who have this like already well-established relationship with me, the podcaster, but we've never actually spoken in person. I mean, honestly, that happens every time somebody comes to an interview, even when we started this, right? Of like, oh, I've been listening to you. And like, I like how you put it, that like that parasocial relationship is kind of another entity in the room of early like one-on-one conversations. And everything you're sharing is also just kind of further sort of fleshing out this picture for me of the way that from a therapeutic approach to ethical marketing, there are these things that are strictly like not allowed, like soliciting testimonials or referrals. And then there are these other pieces that are still a part of the question. And that's where your own values and ethics have to come into play around, how do you value transparency as a form of disclosure or privacy for yourself? And of course, for your clients, right? So there are all these different layers when it comes to ethical anything. And I think for me, you kind of hinted at this earlier, but part of the reason I wanted to talk to you about ethical marketing is because you bring the sort of therapeutic approach. You have the sort of professional requirements and then like your therapeutic considerations, your more personal considerations that you're all wrapping into ethical marketing. But I'll be honest, this is a hot take. Sometimes when I see people talk about ethical marketing, I feel like they're kind of just not wanting to market their business. So they say a lot of really normal stuff is unethical. Like I don't personally, in my podcast business, find it unethical to ask for testimonials after I've worked with someone for a while, right? Like it's totally fine. But I'll see people make more blanket claims that like testimonials are unethical. And I'm like, wait, what? Where, and I understand it from a therapeutic perspective, but not just from a general marketing perspective. I'm curious if you see any of this or how you start to sort out things like this.
I'm glad you bring up like the difference between different kinds of professionals. And something I'll disclose about myself is that with clinical clients, I don't solicit testimonials, but in like a non-clinical community group, I might do that, right? There are different kinds of relationships. And maybe it's useful to kind of unpack that example. Like in a clinical psychotherapy relationship, like let's imagine I was to work with someone for a couple of months and then come to them and ask like, hey, I would love if you would say a few words about your experience of therapy with me. And I would use that in my social media and my website, right? A couple of things could happen. And again, it would depend so much on what was going on for that person. But there's a risk that that client might feel like, oh, here's an opportunity for me to really please or impress my therapist, right? And it's hard to do good therapeutic work when someone's really concerned with being the gold star client. Another thing that could happen is it might feel for that person like, oh, I thought like the conversations in the relationship that we were building here was really all about me. And now my therapist wants to kind of use some of that for their own benefit. Like it's kind of changing the rules or the expectations of what the purpose of the space is for. I mean, there's a lot that could happen there and ways that could damage that relationship because of the way that relationship has been set up. In terms of like a podcasting relationship, it's really different, right? In terms of someone attending, a drop-in group that is very deliberately not therapy, it would be really different. So I think depending on the context, but there's also a lot that anybody can do, regardless of whether or not you're a regulated health professional, to make sure that there is that sense of choice and agency and that there's not something at risk if they say no, right? I think wherein like a client-therapist relationship, it gets dangerous. But, perhaps you or someone in any other kind of business could say, here's an opportunity if you'd like to share about what, our work together has meant for you. Here's where it's going to end up. Here's an option to not have your name included, an option to edit what's been said. Like there's a lot of ways to kind of work around that. But I think the important piece isn't necessarily that there's a strict rule or a one right way, but opening up more consideration for how that ask impacts the person being asked.
even the examples you gave were reminding me that like we can bring our ethics and our values into how we do these things as well, right? So having the opportunity for a testimonial to be anonymous or not, to consent to it being edited or not. There's also a way to ask for a testimonial that invites negative or constructive feedback as much as it does positive or praising feedback, right? So there are all these different ways that our own values can be and are embedded in how we practice these marketing tactics or strategies like testimonials. And I think maybe that's starting to get at like what is like rubs me the wrong way about some of the ethical marketing conversations that I encounter, because it feels like a long list of like, don't do this, don't do testimonials, don't do limited time offers, don't do promotions like this, don't do prices that end in 7 or 9. It's like a litany of things I'm quote unquote not supposed to do. And no resources to help me actually understand, okay, how do I just make more ethical decisions in line with my values? Like, that's what I think ethical marketing is. And that's also why I like your approach, because it feels really grounded in that.
Values embedded, that phrase you used feels like it gets at the core of what we're talking about, right? I mean, perhaps it's the same as defining wellness. We're not going to find a prescriptive one-size-fits-all definition of wellness. We're not going to find a prescriptive one-size-fits-all definition of ethics either. But I think what we can aim for is congruence, right? If we pride ourselves as being professionals or service providers or whatever kind of work we do, if we pride ourselves as being the kind of service provider that is sensitive to the fact that everyone you encounter has a different lived experience, has likely experienced trauma, whether that is acute, systemic, chronic, and that makes them sensitive and vulnerable in a way that we probably can't see or perceive on the surface, right? How is it that we can craft a way of talking about our work that then aims to be sensitive to that vulnerability, that aims to share in like decision-making, agency, choice? What can we do in our copywriting, in the way we talk about our work, in the way we set up our work that shares power?
I love how you're talking about this. And everything you're saying is reminding me of a conversation I had maybe a year ago now with Jess Jackson on trauma-informed business. And I know that you also do work around trauma-informed marketing. So I'm curious, could you offer a couple examples perhaps of common marketing tactics that you see out in the world of online business and ways they could be more trauma-informed for our customers, clients, communities?
Absolutely. I think one that all of us have probably seen, I mean, if we're scrolling online today, we've probably seen someone say something like, hurry, doors are closing, spaces are filling fast, right? Something that creates a really high pressure sales environment that piques a sense of urgency. So I think when we see those or decide whether or not to talk about the time frame around an offering, for example, we can be sensitive to what kind of emotion that statement is likely to pique, right? Is someone likely to feel anxious, activated, afraid? Are they likely to feel like their choices are being limited, that there's scarcity, right? So those are some of the headspaces that might be effective at making a sale, but it might not feel congruent to the work that we intend to do with that person later. It might not be congruent with our values. So I think a way of addressing that one is to be truthful, right, about scheduling and availability. So it might be truthful that there's 2 spaces left in a group that you're offering, or that you have a window of time twice a year when enrollment is happening, right? You can be truthful about the parameters, but using non-urgent language and, thinking about the way you structure things and whether or not the reason for structuring it is to pique anxiety or because it's a system that is going to work with your business and be predictable for you, or there's a lot of reasons why someone might choose to structure an offering or sell an offering in a specific way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have definitely so many times spotted this language of like, hurry, last chance, spaces are filling fast, everything's going to go, you're going to miss out. Like, clearly stoking that FOMO And I think at this stage, the ones that are the most interesting to me are like when it's working on me, when I catch myself, especially like if I've ended up in a funnel, I find that it's like not one discrete thing that feels manipulative, but it's like how they're layered together, right? So if I'm in a funnel and every email, it's like, hurry, 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 spacers are filling fast, and there's countdown timers, and there's all of this sort of scarcity language and all of this sort of like, you don't want to miss out. Now's the best time. Like the more it ramps up, the more it layers on top of each other, the more personally my like critical thinking and discernment skills are eroded, and the more likely I am to feel compelled to say yes. And this is also why I have stopped attending any funnel webinar, because I am so susceptible to this. Like when that person is like limited time offer, sign up right now. Oh my gosh, Susie just signed up. Oh my gosh, Kelly, I see you're here. You just signed up. This is going to change your life. Oh my gosh, the price is going up in 25 minutes. Oh my gosh, we're going to talk for 10 more minutes. I'm going to answer your questions. If you're not feeling sure, you're going to feel sure within 5 minutes. Like I can do the whole spiel.
And especially if you've got this parasocial relationship with that person too, right? If maybe you've developed this affinity for them, it's like, oh my gosh, I have this opportunity to be close with this creator who perhaps has had an impact, or their content has had an impact. Maybe they're talking about something that I'm currently struggling with, and it feels like, okay, here's this person, the only person who has expertise in this thing, and they're offering this service, and oh my gosh, I might have a chance to feel connected and close to them. Like the layering of not just the urgency, but like their authority, your desire for connection, like depending on what it is that this person is selling, maybe the degree of your own suffering or something that feels painful.
And I feel like now we've circled back even to the beginning of our conversation, right? Like for anybody who has gotten sort of caught in these sorts of experiences or funnels or emails or webinars and bought the thing, like we've all been there. Like it happens to us, then we have to understand the sales tactics that are at play. And so this is where I get like, I'm 100% here to call out those sales tactics as manipulative or unethical to some degree. But again, it's like when we go back to any one single one, there's like a question, right? So the one I always think about is countdown timers, because I've definitely seen people say like countdown timers create a sense of urgency that is coercive. And I've seen other people say for neurodivergent people who experience time blindness, countdown timers are the only way that I ever know when my time is running out to do something, right? So it's like every single one of the tactics has a sort of like, you could argue it any way, ethical, unethical, neutral, whatever. But to me, it's like how they get layered to become more compelling as they combine. Like their additive effects are where I start to make like the judgments around, like, I think this is problematic or not.
Another place that it makes me think of is the tactic of identifying a pain point, right? There's so many ways where that could be beneficial, right? Maybe you're learning something about neurodivergence or seeing some kind of psychoeducation online that reduces stigma, right? I'm one of many, many people who realized they had ADHD during the pandemic because of TikTok. And it was because people were talking about what's painful for them in a public space. That could be one side of talking about like a quote unquote pain point. But the other side could be describing a painful experience in a super limiting or a super general way, with the impact of telling someone like, hey, this is what's wrong with you, and I've got the keys to fix it. Oh, but here it goes. Oh, the doors are closing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's sort of, again, that layer. I'm really glad you brought up pain point marketing, because I had a conversation earlier this season with Nicole Cloutier about pain point marketing. And we talked about how, as business owners, it's very important that we know the problems our clients or customers have and how our offerings or products solve those problems. Like that's the core part of being in business. And at the same time, how do we talk about the problems in a way that feels in alignment with our values, and also in a way that doesn't cause the problems? Like we're not trying to invent problems to solve them. And I was thinking about this as you were talking, like how do we speak to the problem with kindness and with care? And how do we present our solution perhaps as not the only option that must be purchased right now, and like build all the coercion into that side of it either?
And to add to that, how do we talk about pain and suffering as people who perhaps can offer solutions or support without making ourselves the only authority, right? Without reinforcing a power hierarchy that doesn't necessarily need to be there or that limits someone's choice around how they want to address that suffering, right?
Yeah, exactly. How do we speak to those pain points, those problems in a way that opens up the possibilities for healing and for solutions, not that closes them off to only us forever and ever. Amen.
Well, it's tough to do that on social media because that is a space that lacks context and nuance, right? If I make a post that says, here are 5 art therapy activities to heal your trauma, that's going to do way better than having like an hour-long unpacking of like, here are expressive therapies techniques that can have an impact on your parasympathetic nervous system. Like there is so much more nuance that needs to go into conversations about how we suffer, but our digital appetite has been kind of trained on a model that offers immediate solutions, offers very little context or explanation, and is so much faster than we know healing to actually be.
So true. So true. We haven't said this yet, but like we're both just being very sensitive to positionality. Like, what is your position in a broader societal context? What is your position in the moment you pick up your phone? Like, it's all about awareness of this. And something I've started thinking about pain point marketing that's really emerged in this conversation with you, Amelia, that I'm really grateful for is like, I think it's very different to market to a problem that kind of is silenced by our broader society and the structures of oppression within, and to try to help people see, like, this is not your fault, or like being this way is not a problem. There's so many, even I was thinking of your example, like neurodivergence, like coming to understand something about ourselves that has been like repressed or oppressed by a broader society. I think that's so different in our pain point marketing than the common pain point marketing I see of things like, let's just say GLP-1s, where we are just piling on the diet culture, right? We are just going right to the most like oppressive narratives that live inside so many of us. And we are piling on top of that to try to sell something. That feels so different. And I want to say this because most of the people listening to this, all of your beautiful, wonderful art and business offerings are trying to like interrupt and interject in culture. And so when you point to those pain points and those problems, like we need help with that. I think I do. I need help with that. What I don't need help with is when I'm watching Hulu to get yet another Ozempic commercial shoved down my throat, right? And I think I hadn't had quite this like crystallization of that before, that it's like our orientation toward dominant culture is really important to recognize when we're talking about like what are the types of problems that our work resolves and who is our work for. And, I'm here to like critique ethical marketing from the standpoint of like, even it can be more ethical, not from the standpoint of like, now I want to keep doing all my coercive stuff and just like hang out in the world where I'm manipulating people to hate themselves forever. Like, I think sometimes I forget that like I'm already standing so far outside of the norm of marketing and online business advice that even when I go to like have a difference of opinion, I'm stepping farther away, not closer in to that norm, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Yeah. What comes to mind for me is that oftentimes in our activism work, we can get lost in the set dressing of the identity, right? I am an ethical service provider. I get it right. There's a place where we can kind of stand on our high horse and be so consumed with the getting it right or the phrasing things perfectly that we forget to orient toward the real thing we're fighting.
Yeah, which feels like it perfectly takes our conversation full circle, because that's how we talked about our critiques of social media, right? Was to be critical of the companies and their tactics and not of our own perceived, quote unquote, lack of self-discipline or self-control. And I think that, yeah, it feels like it applies here as well. And of course, I'm always here to talk about how like perfectionism within activism is incredibly unhelpful. Like all action is imperfect is something it says on the Softer Sounds website. All action is imperfect, and yet we stand for this. Like we have to do the both and yet again, which is something I've said a lot of times today, I feel like. Amelia, this has been such a lovely conversation. Do you have any final thoughts on ethical marketing from the perspective of a therapist or a content creator that you would like to share with all of us today?
I think you kind of summed it up perfectly, that we can be curious about ourselves, offer ourselves a lot of grace, and hold the critique for the systems and the reasons upstream that cause our suffering. But perhaps just to reiterate, like what we might want to ask ourselves, when we're crafting web copy or when we're writing an Instagram post, is not just, is this ethical or is it not ethical? Because that's a confusing question. But maybe the question is more, what is a person likely to feel reading this, right? Does this kind of messaging contribute to the culture I want to belong to and want to encourage? Is this way of talking about my work in congruence with how I believe I show up in my work, in my values?
Those are such beautiful, grounded questions. How do you check in with how this might make someone feel and the culture that it contributes to? Beautiful. Chef's kiss. I love
It's
it.
perhaps the same skill as checking in with yourself about, how do I feel when I feel well? How do I know for sure, right? What are the tells internally for me? And what are the tools, expressive, reflective, that help me feel like I'm understanding myself and saying something true back to myself in that conversation, right? We can do that not just as we untangle what wellness means for us, but we can do that as we define what ethics means for us. Because if we go looking for an external definition on social media, it's going to be defined by the forces of capitalism that shape social media. So, I mean, perhaps the landing place of this whole conversation that we keep coming back to is, how do we stay in conversation with ourselves so that we can really hear it when we know what's true?
What a beautiful and profound place to end. Well, Amelia, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining me right before you step back from work for what I hope will be a beautiful maternity leave. How can folks connect with you this spring or this year? What's coming up in your world, even if you will be taking a break from some of your online activities or definitely your social media presence?
There's a lot I am kind of building and putting out there to kind of hold my place or to be useful resources while I'm taking a step back. So if you want to download kind of an overview and some examples of this ethical decision-making framework, also with some art and writing prompts to get into it in a creative way, that is available on my website, which is arttherapyinreallife.com. And the same goes for my book. That is The Art of Thriving Online. You can find that wherever you like to buy books, in audiobook format as well. And that's a workbook, right? So it's really participatory and is full of art and writing prompts and stories and reflections on all of these themes that we've explored, but specifically looking at how we attend to our attention, our feelings of comparison, disinformation, belonging. There's a lot in there. So that book is really for anybody who is looking for creative tools to step into that conversation about well-being online themselves. So The Art of Thriving Online is the book, but on social media as well, I am Art Therapy in Real Life on TikTok and Instagram for right now.
Well, the book is exquisite, so I hope everyone will get their own copy, go buy yours, and mark it up. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. I hope that this conversation has maybe helped you unravel some shoulds that you might have been having around your social media use or non-use, as well as maybe some question marks you might have been holding around ethical marketing and what that might look like in your business. Spoiler alert, we didn't give you any answers, just more invitations to ask yourself questions, as we always do on this podcast. And I think that is plenty for today. So both Amelias here, signing off. Until next time, we will see you off the grid. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really